My name is Brian, and I will be discussing the modern practicalities of virtual reality in three different major sectors. These sectors being educational and the multitudes of different learning models, medical and the transformation of therapy and training, and business and the evolution of application demos as well as employee training. Before I go into how this technology is transforming these three industries, I thought I would give a little bit of a breakdown as to what virtual reality is and what types are making the largest current impact. There are primarily two different types of virtual reality, that being wired devices, which require a headset and a desktop capable of running virtual reality programs, and wireless devices, which typically has the hardware necessary inside the headset itself. Wired devices are some of the most common devices in the industry. These consist of the Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and the Valve Index. Despite being the most common devices on the market, they are not the ones we will be discussing in this video. Wired devices are primarily used for entertainment purposes such as video games or VR development, and are not as transformative to the sectors mentioned earlier since they require a hard connection to a desktop computer, so that leaves us with mobile wireless devices. This is where I feel the industry is truly breaking out. Some examples of these headsets would be the Oculus Go, Oculus Quest, and most importantly, the Google Cardboard, which as the name implies is actually made out of cardboard. While the Oculus headsets are not too expensive for businesses attempting to utilize their potential, coming in at a price of $200 for the Go and $400 for the Quest, the Google Cardboard is what most of our discussions will be revolving around, coming in at a whopping $15. Unlike the Go and the Quest, the Google Cardboard has no built-in hardware, instead relies on the inclusion of smartphone devices. Since we're getting to the point where many, if not most people have a smartphone, VR technologies such as the Cardboard are showing their importance as cheap alternatives. And that brings us to our first sector of analysis, education. Educational tools come in the form of learning, travel, and creative expression. Small wireless devices such as the Google Cardboard make these types of styles possible in a classroom environment. Anatomy is a big area of learning as they allow for either individual analysis or group learning to visualize an anatomical structure more in depth. Using this format allows for a more in-depth view into the different moving parts of an anatomical being such as humans. By being in virtual reality, schools save money on having to purchase actual anatomical figures to help demonstrate their point. It also allows students to be more hands-on. Virtual reality is also used when learning about natural disasters, as it allows children to explore the aftermath of a real disaster to show how destructive natural disasters can be. The immersion allows for deeper understanding of the magnitude of these events, as images themselves do not do as good of a justice. This information can be easily displayed with 360-degree videos, where students are placed in the center of the event. History seems to be one of the largest areas for education because people have gone out of their way to recreate historical events for students to participate in and observe. One example is the history of King Tut. As children experience the rich history of Egypt as it unfolds in front of them, they also view the developmental reign of King Tut. Another large one is the exploration of Anne Frank's home as it was back then. This allows for users and students to see what life was like back then and what type of living conditions Anne Frank was forced to live under. Virtual reality is also a great tool when it comes to marine biology, as it transports and immerses students in a complex underwater environment and explains the deeper environmental issues that are currently plaguing the underwater ecosystem. The users descend to the coral environment and travel across the beautiful reefs below, while also getting a strong look at the threats that have been highlighted for them. Math is an interesting one, as it's one I would not expect to see translated to virtual reality, but in the game Number Hunt, students are transported to a virtual world where they must shoot numbers with different guns that can add, multiply, subtract, and divide. The goal is to make math more interesting and help children develop broader mathematical skills. The travel aspect can be seen in world exploration as well as field trips. Google Earth has been translated to virtual reality as well as Street Viewer and allows for users to explore any major locations as well as their own street if it is on Street Viewer. The tool gives users the great ability to explore wherever they like around the world and help them develop their knowledge on global areas of study. Field trips are done through virtual tourism tools. The Arlington Science Focus School in Arlington, Virginia has also used similar tools to take their students on virtual trips such as the Smithsonian Museum. The Smithsonian themselves have a ton of different tours for users to explore for themselves. Schools are able to save a ton of money by simply transporting their students to museums virtually. Content creation is an interesting one, as virtual reality as a tool has already seen the introduction of several different creative expression applications, such as Tilt Brush, which allows for three-dimensional painting, or Gravity Sketch, which allows for users to model things in a virtual environment. These can also be exported and used in any other program or even 3D printed. Education as a whole is an industry that is likely to grow, as it has the most practical applications, being able to allow for a hands-on use of tools that may normally be too expensive for typical schools to purchase, or being transported to locations normally out of reach in a school setting. This opens the door to many different forms of teaching while also saving costs along the way. Being a creative outlet is also a great way for students to show off their artistic expressive abilities in a new developmental environment. Now let's switch to something a little different, that being the medical sector. Medical sees the largest development in changes in therapy, rehab, and training. Unlike education, the medical industry sees a larger inclusion of wired devices or more expensive wireless devices such as the Quest, as they require more hands-on. When it comes to therapy, pain is one of the largest forms of study, that being either skin disorders or burn victims. One example of this is a virtual program called Snir, which transports patients into a world featuring images meant to distract burn patients from the pain. The images include ice and snowmen who attempt to paint a cooler and happier environment for patients to find peace in. Patients who played the game during treatment reported up to 50% less pain than similar patients who did not participate. Research also shows that the game shows a change in brain function, indicating that the patients themselves feel less pain. The game itself would not be the only thing to treat these patients, and would be supplemented with traditional remedies. Anxiety is another area where researchers have been able to see improvements, as they put someone with anxiety into a virtual situation meant to trigger a panic of some sort. These are incredibly controlled environments, since they are virtual, and are meant to help people conquer their fear. One example of this would be a simulated scenario called arachnophobia, where people with the fear are placed in a room with spiders and must touch them as they crawl over them. By being placed in a scenario such as this one, patients are meant to be able to come to terms with their fear. PTSD is another example of therapy conducted, as clinicians can recreate the scenarios that trigger anxiety in the patient, such as putting them on a plane or a room full of people, or even in a battlefield setting. One aided the people can grow accustomed to the scenario until they cope with the problem. There have also been developments in virtual therapy, where users are transported to a therapist's office with a real therapist. This is for anyone unable to leave their home due to medical or mental problems. Rehabilitation has not seen as large of a progress, but has done a great job on leading developments when it comes to recovery from strokes. Researchers have seen a large improvement in hand and arm movement compared to conventional rehab after 4 weeks of therapy. They've also seen that VR-assisted patients have had better mobility when the doctors checked a couple months later. Patients who use virtual reality as treatment also proved to be happier when the treatment was conducted. When it comes to training, surgeons are able to develop their skills with virtual operating tables, where they are able to test different scenarios and use different equipment otherwise inaccessible. By operating virtually, students and doctors are able to attempt complex operations without the risks associated. Nurses and first aid responders have similar training simulations that they can run through, which involve different problems with patients in which they must figure out the correct solution and apply proper medical procedures. Virtual reality in medical is another breakout area of development, as a ton of different training regimens can be easily translated into a virtual environment, which then help cut down on the price of traditional training. Virtual reality has already seen such a large impact on therapy development, and it would be interesting to see where other areas of the medical sector take it as it becomes more readily available. The business applications for virtual reality are more sale-based and less learning-based. Training being one of the largest exceptions to that, as virtual training opens the door to non-conventional, more hands-on training simulations. Large companies such as Walmart have already begun to implement virtual training regimens for their employees to learn it. These simulations would replace the conventional video training that companies have grown to use over the years. Researchers have found that users retain 30% more knowledge from virtual simulations as opposed to traditional methods. VR safety training also reduced injuries and illnesses by 20% in comparison. The largest area where businesses are using virtual reality would be prototyping and design. As mentioned in the education section, virtual reality allows for a creative outlet for expression. 3D modeling and virtual development are two areas where prototyping really makes its mark. Virtual reality allows for every part, process, or mechanism to be tested in an environment where costs are not a problem when failure is seen. Performance and reliability can be tested under any type of condition, quickly, cheaply, and safely. Developing a tool in virtual reality first as opposed to physically saves the cost of materials wasted to achieve your particular vision. Once something is developed in virtual reality, it also becomes great for presentations and demoing. Audi is a large example of this, as they have already converted some of their showrooms to virtual reality demos where participants can examine the car and interact with it virtually, as opposed to having a real physical demonstration set up. Rather than a physical showroom, customers would simply put on a headset and navigate through a virtual one. IKEA is another example of this type of transformation, as they have converted some of their showrooms to virtual for customers to navigate through and explore to help them find furniture that they like. Businesses see primary benefits from training, prototyping, and marketing, and would supplement virtual reality in areas where it can help benefit cost savings. From my research, I believe that virtual reality has a bright future when it comes to each of these major sectors. As virtual reality currently stands, it appears to be in its infancy, and I'm interested to see where it goes from here. Once again, my name is Brian Kunz, and you can follow more about me on my website, which will be in the description below.